What if Lucifer never fell, but was sent with a hidden purpose? The story begins long before cathedrals, before the theology that shaped centuries of fear. The name Lucifer was not born as a synonym for the devil. It first appeared in ancient texts, translated in ambiguous ways, hiding meanings that few dared to confront. In Jerome's Latin Vulgate, Lucifer simply meant light-bearer, a reference to the morning star, the planet Venus, a symbol of brilliance, not of darkness. Yet over the centuries, that word was twisted until it became the embodiment of the ultimate enemy. Why was the Lightbringer turned into the Prince of Shadows? Who had the interest in erasing its original meaning and shaping a demonic figure? The narrative we know today was born out of political and religious choices. The prophet Isaiah in chapter 14 never wrote about the devil, but about the downfall of a mortal king, likely Nebuchadnezzar or another Babylonian ruler. Still, interpretation shifted, pulling the figure of Lucifer into an eternal abyss. Painters began to depict him, preachers fueled the fear, and little by little, the Lightbringer became the supreme adversary. But if the original text never spoke of the devil, who is Lucifer really? And what if the light he carries is not rebellion, but forbidden knowledge? These questions echo like a secret kept in archives that never reach the public eye. And when we turn to the apocryphal Gospels, we find passages even more unsettling. Mentions of angels who taught wisdom to mankind, celestial beings punished not for evil, but for daring to give humanity what heaven wanted to keep hidden. Could Lucifer be among them? Was he a symbol of enlightenment, turned into a villain to protect a system of power? The clues are scattered, fragmented, yet together they form a disturbing puzzle. The first layer has been lifted, and what comes next doesn't just challenge the official story. It threatens to shake centuries of certainty. If Lucifer is not the devil, then who or what truly hides behind that name? What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments. What if the image of Lucifer we know today was nothing more than a medieval invention? Once we understand that Isaiah never spoke of a rebellious angel, the thread of the narrative leads us to an even more unsettling revelation. Lucifer's true metamorphosis did not come from the Bible, but from human interpretation over the centuries. In the early centuries of Christianity, the church fathers were waging war against sects, pagan cults, and Gnostic traditions. A central figure of evil was needed, an absolute enemy. And the name Lucifer, once filled with beauty and light, was corrupted to become the very face of eternal damnation. But why would a name tied to light turn into a synonym for darkness? Because to control the narrative was to control the souls. Gnostic and apocryphal texts, such as the Book of Enoch, describe angels who descended to earth not out of rebellion, but to teach. They revealed secrets of weapons, magic, astrology, healing plants. They brought knowledge, and for that they were cursed. This detail connects to a forgotten tradition, the light-bearer, not as a demon, but as a forbidden teacher. Over the centuries, the church reshaped this figure. In medieval sermons, Lucifer was already portrayed as proud, envious, the sworn enemy of God. Artists painted him as a dragon, a monster, a prince of hell. The more horrifying his image, the sharper the contrast with the obedience demanded of the faithful. But what if all of this was nothing but strategy? What if Lucifer's darkness was only the shadow, cast by a light someone didn't want to shine? The scriptures never gave him bat wings, horns, or a throne in hell. That was the work of centuries of cultural manipulation, a web of fear and fantasy. Yet the more they tried to hide his original face, the greater the myth became. Today, the name Lucifer stirs fear, but also fascination. He is no longer just the villain of churches. He has become a symbol of rebellion, freedom, and the pursuit of knowledge. A paradox, hated as the enemy and admired as the liberator. And that leads us to a dangerous question. If Lucifer was not simply a character invented to instill fear, then who truly benefits from this construction? What if the truth about Lucifer is not found in hell, but in the secret corridors of the Vatican? If this struck you, don't forget to like this video. What if the Vatican knew that Lucifer was never the devil, but hid it on purpose? If in the earliest interpretations the name Lucifer had already been distorted, it was in the very heart of the church that his image was cemented as the ultimate face of evil, not through the Bible, but through decrees, councils, and sermons that shaped faith throughout the Middle Ages. Inside the Vatican secret archives lie manuscripts that only a few have ever had the privilege or the danger to touch. Documents that reveal alternate translations, omitted versions, and interpretations that never reached the common people. Among them, accounts of Isaiah and Ezekiel, with no direct link to the devil, records that describe the Lightbearer as a cosmic, celestial figure, untouched by darkness. But these records were never widely revealed. Why? Because without the fear of Lucifer, control over souls would weaken. For centuries, the Vatican reinforced the image of the invisible enemy. It was necessary to build a narrative in which every sin, every doubt, every question could be tied to a single name, Lucifer. This not only justified the spiritual battle, but also centralized the authority of the church. And what if this construction was not purely theological, but deeply political? What if Lucifer was used as an inverted mirror, so that the institution itself could stand as the only true light? Popes, cardinals, and inquisitors repeated in their sermons that Lucifer was the prince of darkness. Medieval writers like Dante and artists like Michelangelo immortalized his image in stone and ink, not as the light bearer, but as a grotesque monster. The myth grew so powerful that it suffocated the original truth. And yet, among priests and monks, whispers of another version endured. What if Lucifer was never the traitor, but the victim of a manipulated narrative? These echoes survived in secret sects, in apocryphal manuscripts, in the circles of persecuted mystics. The Vatican knew, and still knows, but silence is convenient. And now the question few dare to ask. If the church has kept this secret for centuries, what else has it hidden about Lucifer that could never be revealed? The next secret may change everything. What if Lucifer was not the enemy, but an ally of humanity itself? Subscribe! What comes next is even darker. What if Lucifer was not the enemy, but humanity's first teacher? While the official narrative frames him as God's great adversary, apocryphal texts and forgotten traditions reveal an entirely different face. The Book of Enoch, for instance, does not mention Lucifer directly, but speaks of angels known as the Watchers. They descended to earth and taught mankind knowledge that forever changed history, metallurgy, astrology, healing herbs, writing, and even the secrets of enchantments. These beings were punished for giving humanity something heaven intended to withhold, knowledge. And isn't that exactly what Lightbearer means? Gnostic traditions echo the same idea. The fall was not an act of blind rebellion, but of sacrifice. The angel of light is said to have given mankind the flame of wisdom, a gift that allowed humans to question, to choose, and perhaps to be free. Why then did the church need to call this teacher an enemy? Because an enlightened people cannot be controlled so easily. In this hidden perspective, Lucifer is not the prince of hell, but the biblical Prometheus, the one who steals fire from the gods and delivers it to humanity, an act of boldness that forever changes the human condition, yet comes at the price of eternal punishment. But there is something even more unsettling. Certain esoteric orders believe that Lucifer was never truly cast out of heaven, but still works in the world as a hidden guide, not as a destroyer, but as a force pushing humanity beyond the chains of ignorance. What if this forbidden teacher was present at the key turning points of history? What if every leap in human thought was just a spark of the very light religion tried to extinguish? The apocryphal texts leave little doubt. Someone tried to teach, and someone tried to silence it. And the uncomfortable question becomes inevitable. Was Lucifer condemned not for evil, but for compassion toward humanity? If Lucifer is a teacher and not the enemy, then who is truly humanity's real adversary? Share this with someone who needs to see what was hidden. What if humanity's greatest enemy was never Lucifer, but someone hiding behind his name? The official narrative built Lucifer as the ultimate villain. But when we look into forgotten texts, an even darker shadow emerges. The true adversary may not dwell in the heavens, but within the very structures that shaped faith. In the apocryphal Gospels, especially in Gnostic writings like the Gospel of Judas, one figure appears again and again, the Archon. Not a fallen angel, but a spiritual ruler who imprisons mankind in ignorance, blinding humanity to the divine. This architect of deception was identified by some mystics as the true enemy, a being who wears masks, twists truth and feeds on fear. And it seems he needed an official villain to draw humanity's eyes away from him. The name chosen? Lucifer. The strategy was simple and devastating. Turn the light bearer into the symbol of darkness, so no one would dare seek the knowledge that could set them free. That way, the real enemy would remain unseen, hidden within the very institutions of religion. What if the true adversary was never the one who brought light, but the one who taught us to fear it? What if the devil, as we were told, was nothing more than smoke and mirrors? Throughout history, councils and popes decided which books would be sacred and which would be burned. The truth was not lost. It was silenced. The true adversary hides in manipulation, in censorship, in fear planted as a weapon. And this leaves us with the question that still disturbs today. Was Lucifer merely the scapegoat of a much greater spiritual war? One in which humanity itself is kept as the prisoner? If that is true, then the entire religious narrative of heaven and hell must be rewritten. But if Lucifer was slandered, then who truly rules the shadows of the earth? Have you ever asked yourself this? Share your thoughts in the comments. What if the true enemy had always been seated on the throne of religion, hiding behind the name of Lucifer? When we investigate the forgotten archives and suppressed texts, something unsettling comes to light. The shadow that rules through fear does not act in darkness, but beneath the glow of the altars. The real adversary hid within the very institutions that promised salvation. Ancient symbols were repurposed, turned into banners of faith. The sun, the morning star, the serpent, all once symbols of wisdom and the natural order. Yet little by little, they were redefined as images of curse. The very star that once represented light became the stigma of Lucifer. Behind this manipulation lies the hand of an unseen power, the architect of deception. He never needs to appear. His work is carried out through decrees, dogmas, and sermons that shape generations. By condemning Lucifer, a wall was raised against knowledge, keeping humanity chained to fear. And what if hell was never a place, but a mental prison built through religious discourse? What if the true spiritual war was never between God and Lucifer, but between truth and the lies that rule mankind? This hidden enemy lurks in the cracks of history. The Inquisition, the Crusades, the persecution of the Gnostics, the silencing of the apocryphal Gospels. All were movements to extinguish any spark that might reveal the other side of the story. And every time someone dared to question, the answer was always the same. That is the work of Lucifer. Thus the smokescreen remained. But here is the provocation that still echoes today. What if the greatest trick of the true adversary was not creating evil, but convincing the entire world that Lucifer is evil? If that is true, then the name Lucifer does not expose the enemy. It exposes the deception. Like this, if any part of it made you uncomfortable. What if those the church branded as heretics were actually the keepers of Lucifer's true face? When the church built walls of silence, a few groups dared to preserve the forbidden memory. Secret societies, occult orders, persecuted philosophers, all kept alive the idea that Lucifer was never the enemy, but the bearer of the light of knowledge. In Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, Hermetic orders, and even in modern Gnostic circles, Lucifer appears as an archetype of illumination. Not the medieval monster, but the symbol of the one who frees mankind from ignorance. For them, the real fall was not Lucifer's. It was humanity's sinking into deception. These societies believed that Lucifer's light represented the divine spark, dwelling within every human being. They dared to see in him not a destroyer, but a guide. That is why they were persecuted, accused of Satanism, burned as witches. But the truth is more complex. They were not worshipping evil. They were seeking spiritual freedom. And what if behind the word heresy lay the very key to human awakening? What if every spiritual resistance was immediately branded as Luciferian precisely so it could be silenced? In the 19th century, occultists like Eliphas Levi and later Aleister Crowley dared to reclaim the name Lucifer in their writings and rituals, not as the devil but as inner light. The reaction was instant. The official religion condemned them as blasphemers. But the question remains, why such fear of a symbol if there wasn't some hidden truth within it? Perhaps because acknowledging Lucifer as the bearer of light would mean admitting that centuries of sermons were built upon a carefully maintained lie. And here comes the most provocative thought. What if these secret societies were not merely reinterpreting, but safeguarding fragments of a knowledge that reaches back to the watchers of the Book of Enoch? If Lucifer is a symbol of illumination, then maybe his war is not against God, but against the false gods that rule the earth. Subscribe! The truth doesn't end here. What if Lucifer never rebelled against God, but against those who only pretended to be gods before humanity? Among forgotten legends echoes a disturbing idea. Lucifer's true conflict was never with the supreme creator, but with lesser entities, archons, false gods, spiritual rulers who trapped humanity in fear and servitude. In Gnosticism, these beings were called archons. For them, the material world was not the work of light, but of a deceitful demiurge who proclaimed himself God. Lucifer, the Lightbringer, would be the one who dared to expose the lie. Not the enemy of the true divine, but the adversary of those who stole the throne. What if the cosmic drama was never about heaven and hell, but about truth and manipulation? What if the false gods created entire religions just to feed on human worship? Ancient mythologies echo this vision. In Babylonian, Sumerian, and even Greek texts, there is always a figure who dares to challenge the established, gods for the sake of mankind. Prometheus, who brought fire, Enki, who saved humanity from the flood, even serpents and stars that rise against the imposed order. The pattern is clear. Someone defying the gods to give power back to humanity. The question then becomes inevitable. Could Lucifer simply be another name in this archetype of liberators? And by branding him the enemy, did the false gods ensure we would never dare to see his true face? These traditions suggest that the real spiritual war is not between God and the devil, but between light and deception. In this light, Lucifer is not the tempter, but the revealer, the one who unmasks the clay throne of gods who were never divine. But if this is true, the impact is devastating. It would mean that centuries of faith may have been offered not to the Creator, but to entities that use the name of God to rule the world. If Lucifer dared to confront the false gods, then his war against those who control humanity still rages today. Tag someone who would dare to watch this until the end. What if Lucifer's conflict never ended, but only changed battlefields? If ancient texts spoke of false gods manipulating empires, today the war plays out in new arenas. Religions clashing in the name of the same God, nations killing under sacred banners, leaders swearing to defend faith while plunging entire populations into fear. Through symbols that have endured for centuries, Lucifer still appears, not as a monster, but as a forbidden idea, resurfacing in art, philosophy, and even pop culture. Black stars, all-seeing eyes, intertwined serpents, torches lit in the dark, fragments of a spiritual conflict that has never ceased. What if the false gods have only changed masks, hiding now in palaces, parliaments, and pulpits? What if every holy war was, in fact, a sacrifice offered to these invisible rulers, sustaining a throne that was never the Creator's? Across centuries, voices dared to speak out, from Renaissance philosophers to modern writers, from persecuted artists to silenced thinkers. Always the same accusation. Humanity lives imprisoned by narratives, designed not to liberate, but to control. And here comes the final provocation. If Lucifer is the Lightbringer, could his war still be raging in the minds of every man and woman? Who dares to question the official truth? Could the cosmic battle not take place in the heavens, but within us, between blind obedience and the pursuit of forbidden light? Because the signs are everywhere. From films to music, from politics to global religions, the name Lucifer continues to be whispered. Sometimes as a threat, sometimes as a revelation. What they fear is not darkness, but the spark that refuses to be extinguished. But there is an even more disturbing secret: hidden records, kept in the heart of the Vatican, revealing Lucifer's true name before the fall, and why it was erased from history. If this unsettled you, that was the point. Comment below. What if everything you've been taught about Lucifer was just the tip of the iceberg, and the true secret has been buried for millennia? After centuries of manipulation, legends, and silence, we arrive at the heart of the mystery: Lucifer's true name, the one that existed before the fall and reveals his original mission. Hidden documents found in apocryphal manuscripts and recorded in secret traditions claim that Lucifer was not the villain we were taught to fear. He was the Lightbringer, the teacher who brought knowledge, awakened consciousness, and challenged the shadows imposed by false gods. The Vatican, guardian of texts and symbols for centuries, never allowed the world to know his original title. Some records speak of a lost word, an identity that, if revealed, could change humanity's spiritual, religious, and historical understanding. The fear was simple: if men realized that Lucifer was not the enemy, the entire narrative of heaven, hell, and blind obedience would be questioned. Throughout this story, we've seen that he is not merely a myth, but an archetype, a symbol of courage, forbidden knowledge, and freedom. Every war, every persecution, every act of silencing leads to the same conclusion. The struggle was never against Lucifer, but against the light he represents. And now, facing this truth, the final and disturbing question emerges. If the official history lies about the enemy, why do we still keep our eyes closed? And more, if the Lightbringer was unjustly defamed, what would you do if you uncovered the truth? Hidden behind the veils of the Vatican and centuries of silence, the cycle ends, but the impact remains. Lucifer's secret is not only historical, it is symbolic, existential, and provocative. Each of us carries the forbidden spark of light. The question is whether we have the courage to recognize it. If all of this is real, why are we still blind? What if it's all true? Write your truth below.